And I'm very pleased to have with us the High Representative for the Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States. I hope I'm saying this right. Fekitamoeloa, Katoa, Utoikamanu?
Yes.
Was I close?
Yes.
Oh, I'm glad. Thanks. And Masud bin Momen, the Permanent Representative of Bangladesh and the Chair of the Least Developed Countries Group. Please, you have the floor. I think you should go first, and then Ambassador bin Momen. Thanks.
Thank you. Members of the press, I would like to express my gratitude to you all for coming to this press briefing. I'm pleased to introduce the 4th edition of the flagship report on LDCs, which my office has produced. The report is entitled The State of the Least Developed Countries 2017. This annual flagship report is extremely important. It puts a focus on LDCs, who remain the most vulnerable countries in the world. Large segments of their population live in extreme poverty, with few prospects to improve their situation. Thus, the mantra of leaving no one behind requires the global community to pay special attention to this group of countries. With 3 years before the 2020 deadline for the implementation of the Istanbul Programme of Action, which entails a new partnership for the development of LDCs, they are still lagging behind in key areas despite some progress. I will highlight a few examples. Average gross domestic product growth in LDCs was 3.8% in 2015, the lowest level recorded for the group in the last 2 decades. The target growth rate for LDCs by 2020 is 7%. While poverty has been declining in some LDCs, it is far from being eradicated. The latest available data shows in about a third of the LDCs, 50% or more of the population were living below US $1.90 per day. The percentage of the population with access to electricity increased by about 6 percentage points to 38.3% between 2010 and 2014. This progress also falls short of the international ambition set forth both in the Istanbul Plan of Action and the SDGs. The number of internet users per 100 increased to 12.6% in 2015, triple the rate in 2010. The target for 2020 is to have universal coverage in LDCs, which is also far from being achieved. The share of LDCs export in global trade has continued to decline, reaching 0.97% in 2015 from 1.09% in 2014. The target by 2020 is double the share of LDCs exports in global exports. To accelerate the progress towards meeting their development objectives, investments need to increase. However, this requires an increase in resource mobilization, which is a major challenge for LDCs. It is for this reason that the special theme for this year's report is financing SDGs and the Istanbul Plan of Action for LDCs. The United Nations World Economic Forecasting Model was used to estimate the magnitude of investment required to achieve and sustain a growth rate of 7% in LDCs. We find that LDCs need to increase their investment as a share of GDP by 2.6 percentage points, approximately US 24 billion additional average investment annually on average. I would like to stress that while meeting the 7% growth would contribute towards meeting some of the SDG targets, more resources would be required to meet all the IPOA objectives by 2020 and also to meet the development aspirations set through the economic, social, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. Regarding financing the SDGs and IPOA for least developed countries, some of the key findings of the report include government revenue as a measure by tax revenue to GDP has been the largest source of development revenue in LDCs since the early 2000s and has reached around 15% in 2015, which is considered to be the minimum below which countries face serious difficulties to execute basic state functions. ODA is still the most important source of external financing for many LDCs. However, its contribution to LDC GDP on average has significantly declined compared to levels in the 1990s. In 2015, 7 OECD DEC donors reached the goal of providing at least 0.15% of GNI in ODA to LDCs, down from 8 in 2014 and down from 9 in 2013. While funding for LDCs from the Least Developed Country Fund has increased steadily through the Global Environmental Facility Phase 5, demand for Least Developed Country Fund resources now exceeds the funds available for new approvals. Since 2011, the level of external debt in LDCs has been steadily rising. Worth noting is that some LDCs have started issuing bonds in the international capital markets. Foreign direct investment is still dominated by a few mineral and oil extracting countries. In addition, the stock of Chinese foreign direct investment in LDCs more than tripled to US dollars 31 billion from 2010 to 2015, making China by far the largest investor. The report concludes with some key messages, which include the following. LDC needs enhanced capacity, including in tax administration, project development, and negotiations with investors. More development partners should meet or exceed their commitments to provide 0.5 to 0.2% of GNI in ODA to LDCs as agreed in the Istanbul Plan of Action, ADES Agenda, and SDGs. To increase access to climate change funding, support for capacity building provided to LDCs need to be stepped up to facilitate the preparation and submission of bankable proposals. Not all finance is suitable for all purposes. LDC needs to assess whether the cost of investment is justified by its social returns. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Madam Under-Secretary General, Mr. Farhan of DPI, and the representatives of the electronic and print media. I would like to commend Under-Secretary General Fekita and her able team for preparing the flagship report entitled The State of the LDCs 2017. We are particularly happy that this year's theme focuses on financing the SDGs in LDCs and elaborates on various sources of financing to accelerate the achievement of SDGs in the least developed countries. We are in the midst of the high-level political forum discussing the status of implementation of the 2030 Agenda. A number of countries have also submitted voluntary national reports. It emerged quite powerfully that there has been progress in achieving the 2030 Agenda globally, but the progress is insufficient and hugely uneven among countries. Inequalities and digital divides between LDCs and the rest of the world have further widened. With more than 38% of their populations living in extreme poverty, coupled with high and widening inequality and disproportionate impacts of crisis and shocks, the development prospects of LDCs are at high risk. We are gravely concerned that the business as usual approach will leave around 35% of the population in LDCs in extreme poverty by 2030. Other SDGs targets are also subject to similar threats if we fail to deliver on our respective commitments. The international community made unwavering pledge in both the IPOA and the 2030 Agenda to provide increased support to the LDCs, recognizing that they are the poorest and most vulnerable countries of the world. While LDCs are in dire need of scaled-up resources to achieve the SDGs, paradoxically, they are consistently receiving declining flows of international support. As the flagship report has alluded, ODA has declined from 41 billion US dollars in 2014 to US dollar 37.3 billion in 2015, representing a 0.9% of GNI of the OECD DAC countries. This stands far below even the lower bound of the target. FDI to LDCs has also declined by 13% in 2016, and the share of LDCs exports have declined to a historical low level since 2007. These trends need to be reversed, and donor countries and our partners need to fulfill their commitments to help LDCs implement the 2030 Agenda and the IPOA. LDCs also need to tap on all possible sources of financing to fill the investment gaps. I sincerely hope that the flagship report will serve as an important reference document for our deliberations and negotiations in the coming weeks and months. I thank you all for your kind attention.